Hi there, welcome to this build of a 49-inch wingspan Diamond Demon. Now, it's a lovely vintage model from the late 1930s, and we're using a great set of plans from Ben Buckle in the UK. Now, the engine that I'm going to use to power this is a Bantam 19 spark ignition engine. Now, if you saw or read the title of this video, you'll realise that change is afoot. I'm not totally happy with the direction I've been going, and it's been sort of niggling on the back of my mind that I wasn't happy with the fuel system and having a separate tank for this lovely spark ignition engine. Now, I plan to have a tank, this small clunk tank, one of the smallest you can get, in the fuselage cabin itself. Now, the reason I was doing that was kind of twofold. One, I didn't think that the tank on the back of this Bantam 19 was going to be large enough and give me a long enough run time. Well, since I've been running this engine, just testing it, making sure I get to know it before I put it in the model, I've realised that actually I'm getting over 2 minutes of run time with this, which I think will be sufficient, plenty sufficient really, when you consider that this is essentially a free flight model. It's quite a powerful engine for the size and weight of the model, and so we should be able to get quite a lot of height and a good glide time using the engine and the tank. But the major kind of issue with this, or one of the other issues, and the reason I was having a separate tank, was that I worked really hard to get the battery under the nose, the battery for the spark ignition engine spark ignition setup. I worked really hard to get that under the nose, and you can see there's a hole here in the firewall that allows us to slot the battery in. Now, the way I had set this up originally, I was thinking that this fuel tank on the back, which sticks quite low, would prevent me from having the battery underneath, having a battery compartment underneath the engine bay. But I've since been looking at this and realised that actually I think if I move the engine slightly forward, then it doesn't need to go down very far. And I think having now got this battery pack and fitted it in through that hole in the firewall, I can see that actually I can still get the battery in, and I can modify the floor of this engine compartment to get this tank fitted. And it will also benefit because in the current position I can't get the timing lever all the way retarded like I might need it to when I'm starting the engine. I can trim some of the balsa around the nose, but that's not really the best solution. I think what I'm going to do is move the engine slightly further forward, which allows a little bit more room for the tank to fit. So I'm going to modify this. I'm going to do away with this integral tank, external tank, and I'm going to use the tank on the Bantam 19, and I think we can make this work. And being balsa, it's a great material to work with, and we can chop it and change it and make it fit. Okay, to get this engine to fit, I'm going to move it forward from the existing mounting holes, and I'm going to take it as far forward as those beams will allow me, and that will give me just the right clearance here for the contact lever, so I can retard it right down if necessary. And you can see this is still banging on the bottom of this this base here to the engine bay. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out a little bit there. I'm going to put a bit of balsa in from underneath, and that will just allow the tank on the back of this Bantam just to seat down into a little bit of a well, if you like. And hopefully we can still then get the battery into that hole under the engine bay. So I'm going to get on and do that now, and we'll have a look at that when it's done. I'll probably still need to just take a little bit off the front here to allow that to clear, or maybe not actually. We'll see anyway. I've ripped out the engine bay floor that was in here, and I've put in a new floor. You can see this here. It just lifts out, really thin piece of balsa, and if I put that in, we can now still get the battery in just without touching it. If that's glued down, it will go in without any problems at all. Now if I put my finger on it, and we can get the battery out. So I'm going to glue that in, and I'll CA it, and then I'm probably a little bit of epoxy around the edges and fuel proofing will seal that lovely. And I'll probably put a little bit of balsa like I had originally at the back here, just to make that look a bit nicer and seal that area. Now originally we had a drain hole, you can just see at the front there. Well, I'm going to block that up, and we'll put a new drain hole at the bottom of this this ramp in the engine bay, and that'll be better really, because the floor of the engine bay now is at a greater angle, it's steeper, so any oil or fuel will run down quicker, and the hole for the new drain hole will be further round underneath, so it won't be as visible. So that's all good so far. Now I've drilled the new holes for the engine, and we can put the engine in, and we can get the right thrust as needed, and the fuel tank is not touching the floor of the engine bay, so that is all really good. I'm really pleased with how this is going so far. Now there's a question of strength, because I've drilled extra holes in here, and I've filed out a little bit more here for the tank because of that right thrust. I'm going to put a little bit of masking tape on the underside of the beach, and I'm going to fill these holes with epoxy just to provide a little bit of strength, and so it's not a place where oil sort of gathers and that. Now I've sanded a little bit more out here, which will have weakened this beach, but this beach is still really strong, and it's tied into these spruce sides anyway, so I think this front end is still stronger than the lugs on the engine, which perhaps isn't a good thing. Perhaps it'd be better if it was a little bit weaker, but anyway, that will be fine. I don't think there's a strength issue there. So if I just drop that in, and now we can see we've got the lever for the timing, the contacts points. Now that still can't be brought all the way down because of this front, but this front is really thick, so I'm going to just take off about a 1/16 or an 1/8 of an inch on the front there, profile it round, and I think that will look lovely. I don't think it's gonna present a problem at all. Right, well, a very quick update. I've got the floor glued in. I got epoxy just around the seams just to strengthen it. Hopefully that shows up. Got a piece at the back to fill that hole that was there. Nice light piece of balsa. And I've put the epoxy in these holes that I don't need, and they're about 80%, 90% full now. And you can see I've taken the masking tape off the one side, and there's still this piece to come off. Just stops the epoxy running through and just pouring out the bottom. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to top those off with epoxy, but I'm going to put some shavings in from beech. I've just sanded some beech on a sanding stick onto a piece of card, and I'm going to mix that with the epoxy to put in there, so it just blends in a little bit and hopefully isn't visible. I mean, this one won't be seen because it's under the lugs, but particularly these back two. Just make it look a bit nicer. And you can see we've got that coloured epoxy in there now, and hopefully that will blend in lovely once it's sanded. Well, I've now got these modifications finished, and it feels really good to get this done, and it's a testament to the beauty of working with balsa, how forgiving it is and how we can adapt it and change our minds halfway through, do something different, and we can still sand it and pull it together. Anyway, let's take a look at this. Right, we can see we've got the floor glued in, I've got the piece on the back and that all glued. I've got my new drain hole at the front there, which is lovely and angled to meet this floor here, so any fuel and that should drain out quite nicely. And I think there is going to be fuel when I'm topping up the tank. It is going to overflow, I'm sure it is. You can see I've got these infilled holes for the mounting, which have been sanded now, and you can still see them, but you know, they don't look quite as bad with that beach dust in there as they would have if they were just plain epoxy. And I've also sanded the nose. I've trimmed probably about 1/8 of an inch off that, and yet it doesn't really alter the profile of the plane. And we can see now, if I put the engine in, there we go. Now we've got the engine in there, and if I just turn this around so it's more side on to the camera, we can see the lever here for advancing and retarding the ignition will come right down. To be honest, it doesn't need to come down that far. It probably doesn't need to come much further down than that, if even that. But at least we've got the option there. It's nice and clear of the front of the plane. But if after having done all this we decide that this 2-minute tank isn't long enough, what we've done is we've created a bigger space below the engine, and I've been thinking about this, and I can actually make a larger tank that can fit on there that would probably give us 3 or 4 minutes if necessary. I mean, we can always revert back to having the clunk tank in the cabin, but I don't think we will, and I don't think it's necessary. And it's great because it will give us, not having the tank will give us a little bit more room in there to play with. And one of the things that always bothered me about the clunk tank was that there was probably about 15 minutes or more of flying time of fuel in that tank. And if my kill switch didn't work and I had problems, I could end up with this flying off to the coast and disappearing, and the coast is only 10 miles away. So, you know, it's if I lose control of it with that much fuel, I will probably never see it again. So I think these changes are really good, and I'm really pleased about getting them done. So what's next? I think we've got that done. There's some more strengthening to go. There's some 316 pieces that need to go in the top of the cabin here, just to make that a lot stronger to seat the wings on. I haven't done them up until now because I wanted to gain as much access to here, and obviously putting in this timber will narrow that opening down, but I think we're at the stage now where we have to do it. I'm also going to put in a few gussets just on here and around the cabin at the front here. But where I put those gussets in, I'm going to make sure that they're set back or set in a little, so that hopefully the tissue and laminating film doesn't press against them, so it's not that obvious. Strength without visibility. And I've still got this piece of sheeting which I've been putting off fitting, and to be honest, it's a really good thing that I didn't fit this, because trying to do this battery compartment from inside here and altering this would have been quite difficult. So, but I think we've got no choice now. We're at the final stages, so I'm going to get that on, going to get this strengthening in, and then I'm going to give it all a really nice sand, and then I think we're ready for some of the finishing touches. Well, this is really coming on now. I've got the extra strengthening in around the top, this extra piece of 316 square. I've got the gussets in the corners, and I've also put some gussets in the corners here, just on that rear piece of the cabin. Now, I'm not sure what colour that's going to be. I think that's going to be yellow. That's going to be yellow there. And I think you'll probably see them through, but the wing's going to be sitting on top here, so I'm not really too fussed, because I don't think it will be that visible, and I think that added strength will be a real bonus. I've been outside for a considerable amount of time sanding this, and it's it's so delicate, you have to be careful how you hold it, but it's so nice to get this profile, because this keel down here was a little bit too wide. It hadn't been profiled to that diamond shape, but now it's just looking lovely. It's yeah, really looking nice. And the same with this, just getting this profiled on the top here, so we've got that lovely diamond shape. I'm still going to go over it with some really fine sandpaper. I think this is about 220, something like that. I'm not sure, but something nice and fine just to finish it off. But I've had enough of sanding for the moment, and it's the gross sanding is done. It's literally just the odd little bit that needs very fine. And you see, I've finally got the piece of sheeting in. So, very last piece of balsa work to be done. Now, the next thing and the final thing for this, before I start to think about putting in the windscreen and the windows and the covering, is I'm going to paint inside the engine bay here. And I'm going to paint the sides, these cheeks, and I'm going to paint it all except for the beach. I think the beach engine bearers I'm going to leave as bare wood, and then once I've got that painted, I'm going to be painting it with a dark grey acrylic paint, and this isn't fuel proof. It's probably going to take several coats, and when I've got that painted, I'm going to fuel proof all around inside there, including the beach bearers, and I'm going to be fuel proofing with 30-minute epoxy, thinned down just very slightly with 95% ethanol, and that will make it lovely and fuel proof, and it will sit on top of that paint lovely, no problem at all. This is a process I've done lots of times and I've never had an issue with it. So I'll get that painted now, get it fuel proofed, and then we'll come back and have a final look. Well, I've now got this finished. This engine bay is looking great. Just take the engine out. It's all painted up inside. I'll just come round and you can see I've got that dark grey paint lining the whole of the engine bay there, except the beach bearers, as I said. And you can see there's a gloss on that, hopefully, which is a really good thick layer of thinned down epoxy to fuel proof it. So it's fuel proofed really well, because this is going to get a really good soaking of fuel as I kind of overfill the tank, I'm sure. Now, I've also done some of the fuel proofing. Just bring this round with the engine in. Also done some of the fuel proofing just on the balsa around here, and particularly where this vent is as well, because I want to make sure that there's no weaknesses in the defences, and because I really don't want to get fuel soaking into the balsa, and there's some quite big pieces of balsa. Anyway, I'm going to draw this video to a close now, because I think we've achieved I've achieved what I wanted to do. We can use this timing lever now. It'll come all the way down here and give us plenty of scope to retard it if necessary. We're going to use the integral tank. We've got it fuel proofed and ready to go. So I think the next job for this, I mean, we're almost at a stage where we can start covering it. That is very, very soon. But I think the last thing I'm going to do before the covering is I'm going to fit the windscreen or the windshield, and that is going to be the focus of the next job. And I'm going to be making that up, making a template up with a bit of card, I think, and then making an original and acetate. And I think I'm going to get that windscreen done. I'm then going to cover it, and then I think we'll be putting these side windows in before, sort of during the covering process. Anyway, we'll see on the next video. So I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it useful, interesting, and please come back and see how we get on in the build of this lovely 49-inch wingspan vintage Diamond Demon.